November 15th, 1943, 20,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakamura's hands trembled on the control stick of his A6M Zero as he stared through his windscreen at something that defied everything he had been taught to believe about American aircraft. His words, recorded that evening in the journal he had maintained since the start of the Pacific Campaign, revealed a mixture of professional admiration and deep foreboding. The Hellcat shrugged off our 20mm cannon as if we were throwing pebbles. We are samurai with wooden swords facing tanks. Diving through scattered clouds at 380 miles per hour, Nakamura had executed a textbook attack on what appeared to be a lone F6F Hellcat that had strayed from its carrier group. His 20mm cannon shells struck the American fighter squarely hits that would have shattered any Zero, yet the Hellcat merely shuddered, rolled into a tight turn, and disappeared into the clouds below. The American pilot had survived. The Zero's vaunted maneuverability had been countered by the Hellcat's raw power, armor, and durability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This moment, one of countless similar encounters across the vast Pacific theater, marked a profound turning point in the air war, though few in the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service fully comprehended its significance in those early months. What Nakamura experienced that day was not merely a technical disparity between aircraft, but the first tremors of an industrial earthquake that would ultimately bury Japan's hopes for victory. The transformation of aerial warfare in the Pacific had begun 18 months earlier, though few in Japanese naval aviation leadership recognized it at the time. In June 1942, during the Battle of Midway, Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots. Admiral Yamamoto had grimly observed, "We can replace the carriers, but not the men." He was wrong on both counts. Japan would struggle to replace either, while America was already building both in quantities that Japanese intelligence officers initially refused to believe. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the 1st Mobile Fleet, had dismissed early reports of American production targets as mathematical fantasies. When intelligence reported that the Americans planned to build 21,000 naval aircraft in 1943 alone, he allegedly laughed and said, even if they could build them, where would they find pilots to fly them? The answer, as Japanese forces would soon discover, was everywhere from college campuses to farm towns to urban centers across America. The first hint of the coming industrial onslaught arrived with the F6F Hellcat. Designed specifically to counter the Zero after American engineers had studied a crashed A6M recovered from the Aleutians, the Hellcat represented a new philosophy in fighter design. Lieutenant Minoru Genda, one of Japan's foremost aerial tacticians, would later write, "The Americans did not try to match our maneuverability. They built an airplane that could survive punishment, deliver overwhelming firepower, and protect its pilot. We built beautiful swords. They built armored knights." By mid-1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy's technical mission had obtained fragments of downed Hellcats and delivered a devastating assessment. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, reviewed the technical report and noted in his diary, "The Hellcat's armor protection exceeds our Zeros by a factor of 5. Their self-sealing fuel tanks make our aircraft appear primitive by comparison. Most critically, their Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine produces nearly twice our horsepower. We have no answer to this." In August 1943, a watershed moment arrived when Japanese forces captured a damaged but repairable F6F Hellcat that had crash-landed on Rabaul. Under the direction of Commander Takeo Tanimizu, Japanese engineers meticulously repaired the fighter using salvaged parts from other downed American aircraft. On September 12th, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Shindo, an ace with 58 victories, became the first Japanese pilot to fly the Hellcat in a series of evaluation flights. Shindo's report, recovered from Japanese naval archives after the war, stands as one of the most honest technical assessments produced during the conflict. The Hellcat is not as maneuverable as our Zero, particularly in low-speed turning fights. But in every other aspect, climb rate, dive speed, firepower, and particularly durability, it is superior. Most significantly, it forgives pilot error. A novice in a Hellcat can survive mistakes that would be fatal in a Zero. After his third test flight, Shindo gathered the senior officers of the 204th Air Group and delivered his verdict without diplomatic niceties. Gentlemen, the Zero was the finest naval fighter in the world in 1941. It is now 1,943, and the Hellcat makes our aircraft obsolete. The Americans have solved the equation of aerial combat, while we have been refining our previous answer. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who would later conceive the kamikaze tactics, was present for this briefing. His response, according to witnesses, was cold fury. You suggest American factory workers have defeated Japanese spirit. This is defeatist nonsense. Shindo, a pilot of impeccable reputation, stood his ground. Sir, I suggest that American factories have produced an aircraft that nullifies our advantages. This is not about spirit but physics. Their armor defeats our weapons. Their power overcomes our maneuverability. That evening, Shindo wrote to his brother, a naval engineer in Tokyo, "Today I flew the future, and it is not ours. The Hellcat can absorb punishment that would shatter a Zero. It can dive away from our aircraft at will. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns turn our unarmored aircraft into flaming coffins. We are sword fighters bringing katanas to a battlefield of tanks." The technical disparity was only the visible manifestation of a far more fundamental imbalance. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, analyzing intelligence reports on American industrial output, presented a paper to Naval Headquarters in October 1943 that laid bare the mathematical impossibility of Japan's position. His calculations, deemed defeatist and suppressed at the time, survived the war and provide a stark assessment. American aircraft production, 1,943. 86,000 total, 21,000 naval aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, 1,943. 16,700 total, 5,800 naval aircraft. American pilot training graduates, 1,943. 20,000 naval aviators. Japanese pilot training graduates, 1,943. 3,000 naval aviators. We begin with a 4-to-1 disadvantage in aircraft and a 7-to-1 disadvantage in pilots, Fuchida wrote. But the Americans replace lost aircraft in days. We take months. They train new pilots in safety far from our reach. We train ours under constant attack with fuel we cannot spare. The mathematics of attrition gives us no path to victory. In November 1943, the disparity became impossible to ignore during the Gilbert Islands campaign. Commander Zenji Abe, leading what remained of the elite Zuikaku Air Group against American carrier forces, described the experience in a confidential after-action report. "We launched 40 aircraft against their estimated 200. We lost 28 of our irreplaceable veteran pilots. We confirmed perhaps 10 American aircraft destroyed. By evening, their carriers were launching full strength again. It was as if our attack had never happened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The American production advantage manifested in ways beyond mere numbers. Lieutenant Tadashi Nakajima, one of the few senior Japanese pilots to survive the war, described the psychological impact of facing American aircraft that seemed to shrug off punishment. "In my A6M3, I put 6 cannon shells into an F6F over Rabaul. The Hellcat's right wing was damaged, but it continued flying, returned fire, and escaped. In that moment, I understood that courage alone could not overcome industrial might. American pilots flew aircraft that forgave mistakes and absorbed damage. We flew beautiful, fragile creatures that demanded perfection." The technical disparity extended to every aspect of the aircraft. Commander Minoru Genda's evaluation report, submitted in December 1943, methodically documented the differences between the Zero and the Hellcat. Their armored cockpit protects the pilot from frontal hits. Our pilots are exposed to any bullet that penetrates the aircraft. Their self-sealing fuel tanks contain fires. Our tanks rupture and ignite. Their airframes can absorb 20mm cannon hits in non-critical areas. Our aircraft disintegrate under 50 caliber machine gun fire. But it wasn't just the Hellcat that demonstrated American industrial superiority. By early 1944, Japanese pilots faced the F-4U Corsair, P-38 Lightning, and P-47 Thunderbolt, each representing a different approach to fighter design, each produced in quantities that Japanese industry could never match. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had once dismissed American production figures as fantasy, now received weekly intelligence reports that tracked the inexorable mathematics of defeat. Japanese monthly aircraft production, early 1,944. 1,500 aircraft of all types. American monthly aircraft production, early 1,944. 8,000 aircraft of all types. Japanese monthly naval aviation losses, early 1,944. 400 aircraft and pilots. Japanese monthly naval aviation replacement production, 300 aircraft, 120 pilots. We lose more each month than we can replace, Ozawa wrote in a confidential assessment for Admiral Toyoda. Meanwhile, American factories deliver more aircraft than they lose, and their training schools produce more pilots than they need. This is no longer a tactical challenge but a strategic impossibility. The Japanese naval leadership attempted to address these disparities through several approaches. The first was to develop new aircraft, the Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden and Kawanishi N-1K1J Shiden, designed specifically to counter American fighters. Commander Sadamu Komachi, who flew both aircraft in combat, noted their improvement over the Zero, but also their limitations. The Shiden was a match for the Hellcat when it worked properly. But for every Shiden we fielded, they had 50 Hellcats. Our newest aircraft suffered from reliability problems we couldn't solve due to material shortages. Their mass-produced fighters worked flawlessly, flight after flight. The second approach was to modify training to emphasize pilot survival over victory at all costs. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Minobe, our head of fighter tactics at the Yokosuka Air Group, circulated new combat guidelines in February 1944 that represented a sea change in Japanese philosophy. Preserve experienced pilots at all costs. Break off attacks against superior forces. Use cloud cover for escape. The goal is no longer to die gloriously but to survive to fight tomorrow. This pragmatic approach came too late. By mid-1944, most of Japan's pre-war and early war trained pilots had already perished. The third approach was to accelerate pilot training, with predictably disastrous results. Lieutenant Toshio Ota, an instructor at the Kasumigura Training Center, documented the consequences. In 1,941, pilot candidates received 300 hours of training before combat. By early 1944, we sent them with 100 hours. By late 1944, some reached their units with only 60 hours. They could take off and land sometimes. Basic combat maneuvers were beyond most of them. Against veteran American pilots in superior aircraft, they had no chance. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, captured Japanese airfields yielded documents that revealed the true extent of the crisis. An instruction manual recovered from Saipan in July 1944 provided simplified combat tactics for new pilots. If attacked from behind, execute one turn to the left and dive for cloud cover. Do not attempt to outmaneuver multiple enemies. Preservation of aircraft and pilot takes priority over damaging enemy aircraft. The contrast with earlier instructions, which had emphasized aggressive tactics and self-sacrifice, could not have been starker. Naval aviation had shifted from an offensive to a survival mindset. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, observing training flights at Yokosuka in August 1944, wrote a private assessment so critical it was never formally submitted. We are no longer creating combat pilots. We are creating targets. They cannot shoot, cannot navigate beyond sight of land, cannot fly in formation. They are sacrifices to maintain the illusion that we still possess an air arm. The Japanese Naval Air Group's operational records from mid-1944 paint a picture of accelerating collapse. The mobile fleet carrier Zuikaku, which had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack with 84 operational aircraft, reported in June 1944 only 45 aircraft operational, with only 30 pilots deemed combat-ready. Of these, only 8 pilots had more than 300 hours of flight experience. American intelligence assessments, declassified decades after the war, showed they understood this deterioration clearly. A naval intelligence report from May 1944 noted, "Japanese naval aviation is experiencing a pilot quality crisis. Intercepts indicate new pilots have minimal training. Aerial tactics have become simplified and defensive. They are husbanding experienced pilots and accepting losses among novices that would have been unthinkable in 1942. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, represented the mathematical culmination of these trends. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, who survived the battle, described it with stark brevity. "We launched 373 aircraft over 2 days. We lost 346 aircraft and pilots. American losses totaled perhaps 30 aircraft, with most pilots rescued. It was not a battle but an industrial demonstration." Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's after-action report, intended only for Admiral Toyoda and Emperor Hirohito's naval liaison, abandoned all pretense of victory. "The first mobile fleet has ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. We have lost 75% of our aircraft and 80% of our experienced pilots. American carrier strength remains unchanged. They can replace both aircraft and crews within weeks. We cannot replace either within a year." The material disparity extended beyond the aircraft themselves to the entire support infrastructure. Commander Yasuna Kozono, serving as maintenance chief for the 343rd Air Group, kept detailed records of aircraft serviceability rates that tell the story of Japan's collapsing logistics. January 1944, 82% of fighters serviceable. April 1944, 63% serviceable, lack of spare parts. July 1944, 42% serviceable, lack of skilled maintenance personnel. October 1944, 26% serviceable. Critical shortage of everything. "We cannibalize 3 zeros to keep one flying," he wrote in September 1944. "The Americans lose a Hellcat and replace it the next day. We lose a Zero, and it is gone forever. Their supply chain spans the Pacific. Ours can no longer cross the Sea of Japan reliably." By late 1944, the disparity had become so profound that it transformed the fundamental nature of aerial combat in the Pacific. Commander Tadashi Minobe, one of Japan's few surviving senior pilots, described the psychological impact in a letter found among his personal effects after his death in March 1945. "The Americans come in waves, fresh pilots in new aircraft, filled with ammunition and fuel. They attack with the confidence of those who know replacement. Aircraft await their return. We rise to meet them in patched aircraft, our fuel tanks half empty to extend range, our ammunition rationed to save bullets. This is no longer a contest between warriors, but between factories, and their factories are winning." The appearance of the F6F Hellcat model in autumn 1944 represented the final evolution of American design philosophy. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's highest-scoring surviving ace, encountered them during the defense of the Philippines. His combat report, one of the last professional assessments produced by Japan's diminishing cadre of expert pilots, recognized the culmination of American industrial and technical superiority. The F6F adds more armor, more powerful engines, and improved high-altitude performance to an already superior aircraft. While we have struggled to maintain production of our obsolete designs, they have continuously improved theirs while increasing production. The gap is no longer measurable. It is absolute. The year 1944 brought the full weight of American industrial might to bear on the Pacific theater. What had begun as a trickle of new aircraft in 1942 had become a torrent by mid-1944 and would transform into a tsunami by early 1945. The numbers told a story that no amount of courage or tactical brilliance could overcome. Captain Sadao Yamaguchi, serving as intelligence officer for the combined fleet, compiled a devastating assessment in July 1944 that circulated among senior officers, but was never shared with frontline units. American aircraft production has reached 8,000 units monthly. Half are combat aircraft, 1/4 are naval types. The F6F Hellcat alone is being produced at a rate of 400 per month. Our total fighter production across all types is 320 per month. They produce more Hellcats each month than we produce all fighter types combined. But even these stark numbers failed to capture the true depth of the disparity. Commander Minoru Genda, who had helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack and now found himself planning desperate defensive operations, identified the critical weakness in a memo to Admiral Toyoda that was discovered in naval archives decades later. Our aircraft production targets assume 100% delivery of aluminum, rubber, and aviation fuel. Actual deliveries now average 40% of requirements due to American submarine interdiction. We plan for 300 new fighters monthly, but deliver 150. Meanwhile, their submarine campaign ensures that 30% of those aircraft never reach frontline units. The effective replacement rate is 105 fighters monthly against losses exceeding 250. The Japanese capture of a damaged Hellcat in the Philippines in September 1944 provided an opportunity for the most comprehensive technical assessment yet. Under the supervision of Commander Takeo Shibata, a team of engineers at the Yokosuka Naval Air Arsenal disassembled the fighter completely. Their 200-page report, portions of which survived the war, documented the full extent of American industrial and design advantages. The Hellcat's R2800 engine produces 2,000 horsepower with 100% reliability over a 200-hour service interval, wrote Lieutenant Commander Jiro Horikoshi, Japan's foremost aircraft designer. Our most advanced engine, the Nakajima Homar, produces 1,900 horsepower, but requires overhaul after 80 hours and suffers from chronic reliability issues due to material quality problems. Their manufacturing tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. Ours vary by tenths due to worn machine tools and unskilled labor. The armor protection and structural integrity of the Hellcat particularly impressed the Japanese engineers. The pilot is protected by 1 inch of steel armor behind the seat and 1.5 inches of bullet-resistant glass in the windscreen, noted Lieutenant Shiro Ishikawa, head of the metallurgy section. Our Zero pilots have no armor protection. Their wing spars are twice the thickness of ours and use an aluminum alloy 30% stronger than anything available to our industry. Their aircraft can sustain combat damage that would tear our designs apart in flight. Beyond the technical specifications lay a philosophy of design that revealed fundamental differences in approach. Commander Takeo Shibata summarized these findings in the report's conclusion. The Americans design aircraft for mass production, pilot survival, and combat effectiveness in that order. We design for performance first, often at the expense of protection and producibility. Their approach enables thousands of adequately trained pilots to be effective. Our approach requires a few hundred exceptional pilots who no longer exist. But the most revealing aspect of the Hellcat evaluation came when a select group of veteran Japanese pilots were permitted to fly the captured aircraft. On November 10, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Minoru Kobayashi, with 17 victories to his credit, became the first Japanese ace to complete a full flight test series in the American fighter. His report, marked "Secret Imperial Eyes Only," abandoned all pretense of patriotic optimism. The Hellcat is not a superior aircraft to our Zero in maneuverability at speeds below 250 knots. In every other aspect, climb rate, dive speed, level speed, structural strength, armament, armor protection, and systems reliability, it is superior by margins of 20 to 200%. Most critically, it can absorb damage that would destroy our aircraft instantly, and its 6.50 caliber machine guns can destroy our aircraft in a single burst from ranges exceeding 400 meters. Kobayashi's conclusion was perhaps the most honest assessment produced by any Japanese officer during the war. If I were to fly combat tomorrow, I would rather have a damaged Hellcat than the finest Zero in our inventory. In the Zero, I must achieve surprise and perfect execution to survive. In the Hellcat, I can make mistakes and still return home. Their industrial might has not just produced more aircraft, it has produced better aircraft, designed around the reality that not every pilot can be an ace, and not every attack can be perfect. On December 1st, 1944, the Hellcat evaluation team gathered for their final briefing before the aircraft was to be transported to Tokyo for further study. Present were Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, Lieutenant Commander Kobayashi, Commander Shibata, and Lieutenant Commander Horikoshi. According to Shibata's diary, discovered after the war, Onishi asked a simple question that silenced the room. "Gentlemen, after examining this aircraft in detail, do you believe Japan can win this war?" The moment extended into uncomfortable silence. Finally, Horikoshi, Japan's premier aircraft designer, spoke. "Admiral, this single aircraft represents not merely American technical capability, but their industrial philosophy. They have designed an aircraft that can be built by average workers, flown effectively by average pilots, maintained by average mechanics, and that still outperforms our best designs in most aspects. This is not merely a better airplane, it is a different understanding of warfare." Admiral Onishi, who would soon become the architect of the kamikaze attacks, reportedly stood up, looked at the disassembled Hellcat components spread across the hangar floor, and said, "So be it. If we cannot match their machines, we shall transcend them with spirit." He walked out without another word. 2 weeks later, the first organized kamikaze units were formed, the final admission that conventional aerial tactics against American air power had become futile. The aircraft carriers themselves told the same story of industrial disparity. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, who served as air staff officer on the carrier Zuikaku until her sinking in October 1944, compiled a comparison that circulated among naval staff officers in early 1945. American Essex-class carriers, 17 completed or under construction. Japanese Shokaku-class carriers, 2 completed, both sunk. American carrier air groups, 100 aircraft per Essex-class carrier. Japanese carrier air groups, 60 aircraft per fleet carrier by 1944, limited by pilot shortage. American naval aviators available, January 1945. 40,000 plus Japanese naval aviators available, January 1945, 2,000 including poorly trained replacements. "We began the war with 6 fleet carriers," Okumiya wrote. "We have lost all of them." The Americans began with 7 fleet carriers. They have lost 3 and added 17 new construction. They now operate more carriers than we have operational combat aircraft to launch from our surviving light carriers. This is not war as we understood it in 1941. This is industrial annihilation. The stories of individual pilots reveal the human dimension of this material disparity. Lieutenant Ichiro Tanaka, who survived 40 combat missions in 1944, described in his diary the psychological impact of facing American fighters. "Today we encountered 12 Hellcats near Leyte. Kobayashi attacked and scored hits on one, which trailed smoke but continued flying and firing. I hit another squarely with my 20mm cannon. The Hellcat's wing was damaged, but it too continued flying. They do not die. Our Zeros, meanwhile, fell in flames from single bursts of their heavy machine guns. It is like fighting demons in iron shells with our bare hands." Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's highest-scoring surviving ace, encountered the F6F Hellcat in the Philippines and provided a professional assessment. The F6F can climb at 3,000 feet per minute to 30,000 feet. Our best climbing Zero, the Model 52, can match this to 20,000 feet but no higher. The Hellcat can dive at speeds approaching 500 knots without structural failure. Our Zero's controls lock up above 350 knots, and our wings risk structural failure above 400. Most critically, their armament, 6 50 caliber machine guns, with 400 rounds per gun, gives them 24 seconds of continuous fire. Our two 20mm cannon have only 7 seconds of ammunition. By January 1945, the disparity had become so profound that Japanese pilots were being ordered to avoid combat entirely unless victory was absolutely assured. Lieutenant Yoshiro Hashimoto, commanding the remnants of the 203rd Air Group, issued orders discovered in a command post on Okinawa. Engage only when you hold at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. Break off immediately if American reinforcements arrive. Preserve aircraft and pilots at all costs. 1 veteran pilot saved is worth more than 3 enemy aircraft destroyed. The fuel crisis compounded these problems immeasurably. Commander Zenji Abe, who served as air officer on Admiral Toyoda's staff, documented the catastrophic decline. Average flight training hours, Japanese naval pilot candidate 1,941, 300 hours. Average flight training hours, Japanese naval pilot candidate 1,943, 150 hours. Average flight training hours, Japanese naval pilot candidate 1,945, 40 hours. A pilot with 40 hours of flight time is not a combat pilot, Abe wrote in a February 1945 assessment. He can take off and land in good weather and fly basic maneuvers. He cannot navigate confidently, cannot execute combat tactics, cannot fly in formation, and lacks the situational awareness to survive his first engagement. We are sending children with minimal training against professionals with superior equipment. It is not combat, but sacrifice. Meanwhile, American training programs were expanding and improving. Documents captured by Japanese intelligence in January 1945 revealed the full extent of the disparity. American Naval Aviator Training Program, 1,945. Primary training, 100 hours. Basic training, 100 hours. Advanced training, 100 hours. Operational training, 50 hours. Total, 350 hours before combat deployment. Average monthly flight hours, American carrier pilot, 30 to 40. Average monthly flight hours, Japanese naval pilot by 1,945. 2 hasta 4 fuel restrictions. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, commenting on these figures, wrote simply, "Their pilots improve after entering combat. Ours deteriorate due to lack of fuel for proficiency flights. The gap widens each month." The American practice of rotating veteran pilots home to serve as instructors particularly impressed Japanese observers. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, analyzing this policy in late 1944, noted its devastating effectiveness. The Americans rotate their aces home after 100 combat missions or 1 year in theater. These veterans then train new pilots using their combat experience. We keep our veterans in combat until they die, taking their knowledge with them. Their system creates hundreds of competent pilots. Ours creates a few exceptional pilots who eventually are lost, leaving only novices. The technical disparity extended beyond the aircraft to every aspect of air operations. Lieutenant Toshio Ota, a maintenance officer with the 252nd Air Group, documented the maintenance comparison based on captured American technical manuals. Hellcat engine replacement time, 4 hours with proper equipment, 0 engine replacement time, 12 hours with proper equipment. Hellcat routine maintenance man-hours per flight hour, 2. 0 routine maintenance man-hours per flight hour, 3. 5. Hellcat average time between failures, 45 flight hours. 0 average time between failures, 25 flight hours. Their aircraft are designed for maintainability, Ota observed. Access panels are standardized. Parts are interchangeable between aircraft. Special tools are minimized. Our aircraft require craftsmen to maintain. Theirs can be serviced by mechanics trained in weeks rather than years. By February 1945, the disparity had become so extreme that it transformed the fundamental nature of the air war. Lieutenant Tadashi Minobe, one of the few surviving pre-war trained pilots, described the psychological impact in his final letter home before his death during the defense of Okinawa. "We engage in combat knowing we are already defeated. We spend hours reaching altitude due to fuel limitations. The Americans arrive above us, having burned fuel without concern. We carefully conserve ammunition, with perhaps 7 seconds of cannon fire available. They fire long bursts, reload, and fire again. Their pilots attack aggressively, knowing their armor will protect them. We fly defensively, knowing any hit may be fatal. This is no longer a contest between warriors but between nations. Their nation can replace everything: aircraft, pilots, carriers. Ours can replace nothing." The final months of the war saw Japanese naval aviation effectively cease to exist as a coherent fighting force. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, one of the last senior officers to maintain a complete diary throughout the war, documented the collapse in stark terms. March 1945. Our remaining carrier pilots have been transferred to land bases as we have no carriers left from which to fly. We have aircraft but no fuel to fly them. We have new pilots but no ammunition to train them. The Americans fly over our bases daily. We no longer attempt to intercept them. April 1945. Admiral Toyoda has ordered all remaining naval aircraft preserved for the final decisive battle for the homeland. This means we do not engage the enemy carriers offshore. We sit in our shelters and count the aircraft overhead. Today I counted 200 carrier planes against which we launched 0. May 1945. The Americans destroyed 60 of our aircraft on the ground yesterday. We did not attempt to disperse them as we have no fuel to fly them. They were positioned for appearance only, to maintain the fiction that we still possess air power. The testimony of surviving Japanese naval aviators, collected by American intelligence officers after the surrender, provides the final verdict on the material disparity. Commander Masatake Okumiya, who became the first comprehensive historian of Japanese naval aviation, summarized the experience. "We began the war with the finest naval air force in the world, superior in equipment, training, and tactics. Within 2 years, we faced an enemy that had countered all our advantages, exploited all our weaknesses, and produced aircraft in quantities we could not have imagined possible." Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, reflecting on his experience flying both the Zero and the captured Hellcat, offered perhaps the most insightful assessment. "The Zero was a finely crafted sword, made by master artisans for master swordsmen. The Hellcat was a modern rifle, mass-produced for average soldiers. In the era of swords, craftsmanship decided battles. In the era of industrial warfare, production lines determine victory. America did not defeat us with superior warriors. They defeated us with superior factories, mines, oil fields, and assembly lines." Commander Minoru Genda, who survived to become the architect of Japan's post-war air force, provided a professional assessment free from nationalism. The Zero achieved its performance through compromised lightweight construction, no armor protection, minimal fuel protection, limited armament. It represented the pinnacle of pre-war fighter design philosophy. The Hellcat represented a new understanding that survivability, reliability, and producibility were as important as pure performance. This is why a nation of 130 million defeated a nation of 400 million. They solved not just the engineering problem, but the industrial, logistical, and training problems simultaneously. The statistics that survived the war tell the final story of industrial disparity. American aircraft production, 1,942 to 1,945. 324,750 total Japanese aircraft production, 1,942 to 1,945. 76,320 total American naval aircraft production, 1,942 to 1,945. 67,800 Japanese naval aircraft production, 1,942 to 1,945. 33,700 F6F Hellcat production, 1,942 to 1,945, 12,275. A6M Zero production, all variants, 1,939 to 1,945, 10,939. These numbers, wrote Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya in his post-war analysis, tell only part of the story. Our losses in training accidents due to fuel shortages and inexperienced instructors exceeded 40% by 1945. American training losses never exceeded 10%. We lost aircraft we could not replace to causes other than combat. They replaced aircraft faster than we could shoot them down. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. The realization by Japanese pilots that individual skill and courage could not overcome industrial disparity. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war, reflected on this transformation. We began the war believing that spirit could overcome material. We ended it knowing that without material, spirit has nothing through which to express itself. The samurai sword is useless without steel to forge it. The warrior spirit is impotent without the tools of war to channel it. By July 1945, what remained of Japanese naval aviation had effectively ceased to exist. Admiral Soemu Toyoda's final report to Emperor Hirohito on the state of naval forces, discovered in imperial archives after the war, made no mention of aviation capabilities at all. The silence spoke more eloquently than any assessment could have. The force that had shocked the world at Pearl Harbor had been not merely defeated but industrially annihilated. The captured Hellcat that had so clearly demonstrated American industrial superiority was destroyed in an American bombing raid on Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in May 1945. It was, perhaps, the most fitting end consumed by the very industrial might it had come to symbolize. The aftermath of the war provided the most complete understanding of the psychological impact on Japanese naval aviators who had faced American industrial might. In August 1945, as Japanese forces laid down their arms, hundreds of pilots emerged from hidden airfields, caves, and mountain bases where they had been husbanding the last operational aircraft for the final defense of the homeland. Many had not flown in months due to fuel shortages. Their testimony, collected by American intelligence officers, reveals the transformation from confidence to despair as they confronted an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. Lieutenant Minoru Suzuki, who had entered service in 1941 and somehow survived 4 years of combat, described the evolution of his understanding. In 1941, we believed we were superior in every aspect: aircraft, training, tactics, spirit. By 1943, we knew the Americans had superior numbers, but believed our quality would prevail. By 1944, we faced superior numbers of superior aircraft. By 1945, we understood the full truth that we had never had a chance. American industry had defeated us before the first shot was fired. We just didn't know it. The psychological transformation extended beyond mere recognition of material disparity. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived to become one of Japan's most insightful post-war military analysts, identified a deeper change. We began the war believing that the spirit of the samurai would overcome American materialism. We ended it recognizing that without material, spirit has no means of expression. The warrior without a weapon is not a warrior but a victim. American industry did not just produce more weapons, it produced better weapons, specifically designed to nullify our advantages. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who commanded Japanese carrier forces at the disastrous Battle of the Philippine Sea, provided one of the most candid assessments in his interrogation by U.S. Naval Intelligence in September 1945. By early 1944, I knew the war was lost. It was no longer a question of tactics or courage or training. It was simple mathematics. They could lose 100 aircraft and replace them in a week. We lost 10 aircraft and never replaced them. After Midway, we never trained enough pilots to replace our losses, let alone expand our forces. The Americans trained more pilots each month than we lost in our worst battles. The captured Hellcat had provided more than technical insights. It had offered a window into American industrial philosophy that many Japanese officers found more disturbing than any performance statistics. Commander Takeo Shibata, who supervised the technical evaluation of the captured fighter, reflected in his 1956 memoir on the most profound discovery. The Hellcat revealed an approach to warfare we had never considered. Every component was designed for mass production. Every system was designed for reliability under adverse conditions. Every aspect of the aircraft reflected the assumption that the pilot would be average, not exceptional. It was designed for a democracy at war, not an aristocracy of expert warriors. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's highest-scoring surviving ace with 64 confirmed victories, had a unique perspective. Having flown both the Zero and briefly tested the captured Hellcat, he could directly compare their philosophies. The Zero required perfection from its pilot. Its light construction, limited armament, and absence of protection meant the pilot must achieve surprise and execute flawlessly. One mistake meant death. The Hellcat forgave mistakes. Its armor protected against minor errors in judgment. Its powerful engine could accelerate away from trouble. Its 6 machine guns meant even a brief hit could be lethal to the enemy. Their pilots did not need to be samurai. They simply needed to be competent. This recognition that American industrial philosophy had created a democratization of air combat represented a profound psychological blow to the Japanese naval aviation tradition. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant tactical innovators, identified this as the central revelation in his classified report to Admiral Toyoda in February 1945. The Americans have solved the true problem of modern warfare, how to make average men into effective fighters through superior equipment and simplified tactics. We sought to create exceptional warriors who could overcome material disadvantages through skill and spirit. Their approach scales, ours does not. They can replace a lost pilot with another of nearly equal effectiveness. When we lose a veteran pilot, we lose capabilities that cannot be replaced. The statistics that emerged during post-war analysis confirmed this assessment. American pilot training programs had graduated over 61,000 naval aviators between 1941 and 1945. Japan had trained approximately 10,000 during the same period. More tellingly, by August 1945, over 75% of Japan's trained pilots had been killed, while American combat losses represented less than 15% of their trained pilot cadre. But the most profound psychological impact came from the recognition that Japan's industrial capacity had never been capable of supporting its imperial ambitions. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, who became Japan's premier naval aviation historian after the war, compiled the comparative production statistics that told the ultimate story. American aircraft production, peak month 1,944, 9,100 aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, peak month 1,944, 2,300 aircraft. American aircraft carrier production, 1,941 to 1,945. 28 fleet carriers, 71 escort carriers. Japanese aircraft carrier production, 1,941 to 1,945. 6 fleet carriers, 5 light carriers. American pilot training graduates, peak month 1,944. 2,400 Japanese pilot training graduates, peak month 1,944. 300. These figures, Okumiya wrote in his landmark 1956 study, Zero, represent more than mere numbers. They represent fundamentally different industrial capacities. America operated at approximately 30% of its potential industrial capacity for military production, preserving substantial capacity for civilian goods. Japan operated at 100% of its capacity and still fell further behind each month. The war was not lost at Midway or the Philippine Sea. It was lost in the factories, mines, and shipyards that never existed. The technological disparity that the captured Hellcat so clearly demonstrated represented more than engineering differences, it revealed fundamental national priorities. Lieutenant Jiro Horikoshi, a designer of the Zero, reflected in his 1953 memoir on the revelation that American aircraft featured self-sealing fuel tanks, pilot armor, and structural redundancy. "We sacrificed protection for performance because we had no choice. Our engines lacked the power to carry armor and still achieve the range and maneuverability we required. The Americans had the industrial base to produce more powerful engines, more advanced alloys, more sophisticated systems. Their protection features weren't just design choices, they were expressions of industrial capability we could not match." This recognition that American technological advantages stemmed from industrial capacity rather than engineering talent was particularly difficult for Japanese technical officers to accept. Commander Takeo Tanimizu, who had supervised the repair of the captured Hellcat, wrote in his personal diary entries released by his family in 1985, "Our engineers are as talented as any in the world. Our designs on paper are excellent, but we cannot manufacture to the tolerances the Americans take for granted. Their machine tools are newer and more precise. Their metallurgy is superior. Their quality control is automatic rather than enforced. The gap is not in knowledge, but in industrial infrastructure developed over decades." For many Japanese naval aviators, the most psychologically devastating aspect of American industrial superiority was not its scale, but its acceleration. Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe, who served on Admiral Toyoda's planning staff, compiled the monthly production comparisons that revealed this disturbing trend. American aircraft production, January 1,942. 2,600 aircraft. American aircraft production, January 1,943. 5,500 aircraft. American aircraft production, January 1,944. 7,100 aircraft. American aircraft production, January 1,945. 9,000 aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, January 1,942. 700 aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, January 1,943. 1,200 aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, January 1,944. 1,700 aircraft. Japanese aircraft production, January 1,945. 1,400 aircraft, declining due to bombing and resource shortages. "The Americans," Abe wrote in his final report, "grew stronger each month while we grew weaker. Their production increased 350% during the war. Ours doubled until 1944, then began to decline as their bombing campaign and submarine blockade took effect. The gap was not static but dynamically expanding. Each month we fell further behind. This is what our pilots faced, an enemy that grew stronger after each defeat, while we grew weaker after each victory." The experience of Lieutenant Ichiro Tanaka, who survived 72 combat missions between 1942 and 1945, illustrates the psychological impact of fighting an industrially superior enemy. His diary, recovered by his family after the war, tracks the evolution of his understanding. March 1942. "Today I shot down 2 enemy fighters over Leh. Their pilots were aggressive but unskilled. Our Zeros can outmaneuver any aircraft they possess. Victory is certain if we maintain our fighting spirit." November 1943. "Encountered Hellcats for the first time today. They are fast and heavily armed. I managed to damage one, but it continued flying. Our advantage in maneuverability is now our only advantage." April 1944. "Lost 3 pilots from our unit today against American fighters. They attack in waves. When one group exhausts its ammunition, another appears. They seem to have unlimited aircraft, pilots, and fuel, while we carefully husband every bullet and drop of gasoline." January 1945. "We no longer seek combat. We hide our aircraft during daylight hours. When we must fly, we avoid contact unless we have overwhelming advantage. This is not how samurai are meant to fight. But with no replacements for lost aircraft or pilots, we have no choice. We are fighting not to win but merely to survive one more day. These personal accounts reveal the transformation from confidence to resignation as Japanese pilots confronted not just a materially superior enemy, but one whose superiority increased rather than diminished over time. The captured Hellcat had provided a tangible manifestation of this disparity, a physical embodiment of American industrial might that could be touched, examined, and eventually flown by Japanese pilots, who had only experienced its lethal capabilities from the opposite perspective. For many senior Japanese officers, the American capacity to learn and adapt proved more disturbing than raw production numbers. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who created the kamikaze units in a final desperate attempt to counter American material advantages, reflected on this quality in his final communication before committing suicide after surrender. The Americans entered the war with inferior aircraft, inadequate tactics, and inexperienced pilots. Within 1 year, they had analyzed our strengths, identified our weaknesses, and produced new aircraft specifically designed to defeat us. Within 2 years, their pilots were better trained than our replacements, their tactics had neutralized our advantages, and their new aircraft outperformed ours in every dimension except low-speed turning. They defeated us not just with production, but with adaptation. The Japanese Naval Air Arm's attempt to counter the Hellcat with new fighter designs, the Kawanishi N-1K-1J Shiden and the Mitsubishi J-2M Raiden, revealed the futility of competing with American industrial might. Commander Sadamu Komachi, who flew both aircraft in combat, noted in his post-war testimony, "The Shiden was a superb fighter, comparable or superior to the Hellcat in most performance aspects, but we built fewer than 1,000, compared to more than 12,000 Hellcats. Our best pilots in our best aircraft could achieve local successes, but the strategic outcome was never in doubt. For every Shiden we fielded, they had a dozen Hellcats and Corsairs." This disparity extended beyond mere numbers to the quality and reliability of aircraft. Lieutenant Toshio Ota, who served as a maintenance officer with the 343rd Air Group equipped with the Shiden, documented the practical implications. The Shiden was theoretically superior to the Hellcat in several performance categories, but our chronic shortages of materials meant that production examples often fell short of specifications. Engines delivered 10% less power than designed. Airframes were heavier than blueprints specified due to manufacturing limitations. Most critically, our new aircraft suffered from reliability issues that American aircraft had solved years earlier. Ota's maintenance records tell a sobering story of technological disparity in practice rather than theory. Shiden fighter, average time between critical failures, 12 flight hours. Hellcat fighter, average time between critical failures, 45 flight hours. Shiden fighter availability rate, 1,945. 53% of aircraft operational. Estimated Hellcat availability rate from captured documents, 88% operational. Shiden engine mean time between overhauls, 60 hours. Hellcat engine mean time between overhauls, 200 hours. In practical terms, Ota concluded, this meant that half our advanced fighters were grounded for maintenance at any given time, while nearly all American aircraft were operational. A technical advantage on paper became a practical disadvantage in the field. The testimony of American pilots captured and interrogated by Japanese intelligence confirmed these disparities from the opposite perspective. Lieutenant James Thach, originator of the Thach Weave tactical formation and a Navy ace, was shot down and briefly held prisoner in 1944. During his interrogation, he reportedly told his captors, "Our planes don't have to be better than yours. They just have to be good enough, because we have so many of them. If I lose a dogfight, I get in another plane the next day. If you lose, there's no replacement for you or your aircraft." The psychological impact of this reality that American pilots operated with the confidence of industrial superiority, while Japanese pilots bore the burden of irreplaceability, transformed the fundamental nature of aerial combat in the Pacific. Captain Minoru Genda observed this transformation in his final tactical assessment in July 1945. Our pilots now fly defensively, seeking to preserve aircraft and their own lives because both are irreplaceable. American pilots fly aggressively, accepting risks because both aircraft and pilots can be replaced. In aerial combat, the psychological advantage of this difference cannot be overstated. Aggression usually prevails over caution. After the war, as occupation authorities permitted limited contact between former adversaries, American and Japanese pilots sometimes met to discuss their experiences. These conversations, documented in personal memoirs and oral histories, reveal the profound mutual recognition of how industrial disparities had shaped their experiences. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Silber, who flew Hellcats with VF-15 from the carrier Essex, recalled such a meeting with former Zero pilots in Tokyo in 1947. They asked about our training, and I told them I had 240 hours before my first combat mission. They looked at each other in silence. Then one of them, a Lieutenant Miyazaki, told me through the interpreter that by 1945, their new pilots had only 40 hours before combat. I explained that we had unlimited fuel for training in Hawaii and the States. He said they had barely enough fuel for takeoff and landing practice in 1945. We spoke different languages, but in that moment, we both understood completely why the war had ended as it did. The war's end brought a final, profound recognition among Japanese naval aviators that the captured Hellcat had represented not merely a superior fighter, but a fundamentally different philosophy of warfare that they could not have countered regardless of tactical brilliance or personal courage. Commander Masatake Okumiya articulated this recognition in his landmark 1952 study of the Naval Air War. The Americans approached aerial warfare as an industrial, rather than an aristocratic endeavor. They built aircraft that average men could fly effectively in large numbers, supported by an industrial base that could replace losses overnight. We built aircraft that exceptional men could fly brilliantly until they died, supported by an industrial base that could never replace our losses. Their approach was ultimately successful, not because their men were better, but because their system was more realistic. For many Japanese naval aviators, the psychological journey from Pearl Harbor to surrender represented a fundamental transformation in their understanding of modern warfare. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, who helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack and survived to help create Japan's post-war air force, perhaps best articulated this transformation in his 1956 address to the first graduating class of the New Japan Air Self-Defense Force. We began the war believing that the spirit of the samurai would overcome material advantages. We learned through bitter experience that without adequate material, spirit has no means of expression. The lesson of our defeat is not that courage and skill are unimportant, but that they must be supported by industrial capacity and technological innovation. The warrior without modern weapons is not a warrior but a victim. In creating this new air force, we must balance the warrior traditions of our past with the industrial realities of our future. The ultimate lesson of the captured Hellcat was not lost on the generation of Japanese leaders who would rebuild their nation from the ashes of defeat. When American occupation authorities permitted the formation of a limited self-defense force in the 1952nd, its air arm was structured around principles learned from their former adversaries' standardized training, simplified tactics, and aircraft designed around average, rather than exceptional pilots. The F-86 Farrads Sabre fighters that formed Japan's first post-war air defense squadrons embodied this philosophy. Mass-produced aircraft with pilot protection, systems redundancy, and maintenance simplicity as primary design considerations. The Hellcat's lessons had been thoroughly absorbed. Today, Japan's aerospace industry ranks among the world's most advanced, producing components for Boeing and Airbus commercial aircraft, and partnering with American firms on military projects like the F-35 Lightning II. The nation that once produced the Zero, an aircraft that sacrificed protection for performance, now emphasizes safety, reliability, and industrial efficiency above all else. For the Japanese naval aviators who survived to witness their nation's post-war transformation, the journey from the Zero to the captured Hellcat to modern aerospace production represented a complete revolution in thinking about the relationship between industrial capacity and military power. Commander Saburo Sakai, in his final public interview before his death in 2000, reflected on this transformation. The Zero represented the past handcrafted excellence, the triumph of skill over mass production. The Hellcat represented the future standardized excellence, the triumph of industrial democracy over individual heroism. Japan lost the war, but we won the peace by learning this lesson more thoroughly than perhaps any other nation. Today, our cars, cameras, electronics, and aircraft components represent the perfect synthesis of craftsmanship and mass production, quality and quantity. We learned from our defeat what we could never have learned from victory. The captured Hellcat that Japanese pilots flew in those final months of 1944 had shown them more than the technical superiority of American aircraft. It had revealed a different understanding of modern warfare that would ultimately transform not just Japan's military, but its entire industrial philosophy in the post-war era. As Lieutenant Commander Jiro Horikoshi wrote in the conclusion of his post-war memoir, "In those brief flights in the captured American fighter, we experienced the future, not just of aerial warfare, but of industrial civilization. The lesson was painful but necessary. The nation that most thoroughly absorbs it will prosper in peace, as surely as it would prevail in war." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.